thank you also to My Jewish Learning for hosting this wonderful, wonderful event. Thank you for the opportunity to join all of you. I should let you know that both Friday night at Shabbat Dinner with Friends and last night when I was running a teen improv for my synagogue here in Milwaukee, for my synagogue's Purim Spiel, twice the idea of a pizza hamantaschen has come up. And I haven't tried that yet. But now that I've heard it, that's the proverbial, I can't unhear it. So all I want now is like a pizza hamantaschen. That sounds phenomenally delicious. So if anyone has tried that before, you can let me know how that tasted. But that sounds great to me. So thank you all again for being here, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. What we're going to do today is before our Megillah reading, we're going to sing one song, and then we are going to chant the Megillah in Hebrew. There are 10 chapters. At the beginning of, and we're going to do 2 chapters at a time, and then we'll intersperse that with discussions. We will post in the link we're going to post in the chat, a link to the text in Hebrew. So if you'd like to follow along in Hebrew, please feel free to do so. What I'm going to do when I'm reading is I'm going to share screen. A friend and colleague of mine, Rabbi Dan Selsberg, puts together every year just an unbelievable slideshow of the English translation with GIFs and fun images and everything. So while I'm chanting in Hebrew, we're also going to go through that slideshow verse by verse. So that way you'll be able to read the English in a somewhat interactive way while I'm doing the Hebrew. And then every 2 chapters, we're going to take a bit of a pause. If people have questions, I'm happy to address questions every couple of chapters. Otherwise, one thing that I would love to talk about, and I think that your questions are more important than anything I'd want to talk about, but one thing I'd love to talk about really is the role of Esther. I don't think we give Esther enough credit for her courage and for her political astuteness and savvy. She is absolutely brilliant in all of her wonderful machinations and manipulations. And I use those words with a smile because she is full of political and court intrigue with Ahasuerus and Haman. So that's one thing that I would focus on. And like I said, if you have questions, please put them in. It is unlikely that if there's a bevy of questions that I'd be able to get to all of them, simply because of the wonderful number of people who are here. I am posting in the chat my email. Please feel free to email me. And you can reach out if we don't get a chance to have questions, or if you have other questions, please feel free to email me. I am good at replying to all emails. I'm not great at replying to all emails necessarily within the proverbial 12 or 24 hours, and especially this coming week when I'm traveling to a conference where I'll be the kind of keynote presenter. A little bit of graciousness in reply time would be appreciated, but please do feel free to email me if you have any other questions. Mara, anything else, or should we jump right to it?
Let's start singing.
Great. All right, so we're going to sing one song here. I know Zoom is not the best forum for singing, so why don't we jump to song number 3 here on this list, Chag Purim. Chag Purim, Chag Purim, Chag Gadol Hu Lahudim, Masechot Rashanim, Zmirot V'Rikudim, Havan Risha Rash Rash Rash, Havan Risha Rash Rash Rash, Havan Risha Rash Rash Rash, Bara Ashanim. Once more, Chag Purim, Chag Purim, Chag Gadol Hu Lahudim, Masechot Rashanim, Zmirot V'Rikudim, Havan Risha Rash Rash Rash, Havan Risha Rash Rash Rash, Havan Risha Rash Rash Rash, Bara Ashanim. All right, to everyone who was singing along, thank you very much. We will now continue with the blessings before the Megillah reading. If you know them and again want to join along, please feel free to join along. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushan b'mitzvotav etzivanu, Al Mikra Megillah. Baruch Ata Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asa nisim lavotenu, bayamim hahem, bazman hazeh. Baruch Ata Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehecheyanu, v'kiyemanu, v'higiyanu, lazman hazeh. All right, in just a moment, we will continue with the first couple of chapters in Hebrew. Haman's name does not appear in either of the first two chapters, so you do not need to get your groggers ready quite yet. I see that one person mentioned nice song sheet layout. Mara, if you have a moment, you can pop into the chat the link to the song sheet. That's public. Anyone is able to use that. And also, if we could get into the chat, let me quickly pop in a link to the Hebrew. What the Hebrew is going to be coming from Sepharia. I absolutely love Sepharia, so we can get into the chat the link to the Hebrew as well. Mara, if you don't mind, thank you so much. And then, like I said, if anyone would like to follow along in the Hebrew, that link is going to come up in just a moment to the Sepharia website. There it is now. And if you don't want to follow along in Hebrew, you can feel free to listen and to enjoy. And thank you again to, Thank you again to my colleague, Rabbi Dan Salzberg, for putting this remarkable slideshow together. All right, it's Purim time. Vayehi b'mei Achashverosh hu Achashverosh mehod hamolech mehodu v'yakush sheva v'esrim u'mea medina bayamim hahem v'shevet hamelech Achashverosh al kisei malchuto asher b'shushan habira bishnat shalosh lemolcho asa mishter lechol sarav v'avadav chel parasu madai hapartemim v'sarei medinot lefanav Beharoto, et oshekevod malchuto, ve'et yekar tiferet gedulato, yamim rabim, shimonim at yom, uvimloot hayamim ha'ele, asa hamelech, v'chol hamim hanitzeim, v'shushan habira, lemigado v'yakatan, mishte shivat yamim, v'chatzar ginat bitan hamelech. Kor karpas utchelet, achuz b'chav levuz v'yargaman, al galilei chesef v'amudei shesh, mitot zahav v'chesef al, ritzvat b'hat v'shesh v'dar v'socharet. V'hashkot b'chlei zahav v'chelim mikilim shonim, v'yen malchut rav kiyad hamelech, v'hashiach hadat ein ones kichen, yisan hamelech, al kol rav beto, la'asot kirtzon ish va'ish, Gam Vashti Amaka Aseta Mishte Nashim Beit HaMalchut Asher LeMelech Achashverosh Bayom HaShavi'i Kitov Lev HaMelech Bayayin Amar Lim Human Bista Charvona Bigtav Yavaktaktaz Netar Chapas Shivat HaSarisim HaMisharatim Et Pnei HaMelech Achashverosh Lehavi Et Vashti HaMalka Lifnei HaMelech b'cheter malchut leharot Vashti lavo bidvar HaMelech asher b'yad hasarisim vayikzot HaMelech me'od v'chamato va'aravo vayomer HaMelech lechachamim yodei ha'itim ki chen devar HaMelech lifnei kol yodei dat vadin v'hakarov elav kashana shetarad matat tarshish Meres Marsana Mimuchan Shivat Sarei Parasu Madai Ro'e Pnei HaMelech HaYoshevim Rishona B'Malchut Kedat Mala Asot B'Malka Vashti Al Asher Lo Asata Mamar HaMelech Achashverosh B'Yad HaSarisim Vayomer Mimuchan Lifnei HaMelech VeHasarim Lo Al HaMelech Levado Avata Vashi HaMalka Ki Im Kol HaSarisim Vel Kol HaAmim Asher B'Chol Medinot המלך אחשוורוש כי יצא דבר המלכה על כל הנשים להבדות בעליהם בעיניהם באומרם. המלך אחשוורוש אמר להביא את ושתי המלכה לפניו ולא באה. והיום הזה תאמרנה שרות פרס ומדי אשר שמעו את דבר המלכה לכל שרי המלך וכדי ביזיון וקצף. אם על המלך טוב יצא דבר מלכות מלפניו וייכתב ודתי פרס ומדי ולא יעבור אשר לא תבוא ושתי לפני המלך אחשוורוש ומלכותה ייתן המלך לראותה הטובה ממנה. ונשמע פתגם המלך אשר יעשה בכל מלכותו כי רבה היא וכל הנשים ייתנו יקר לבעליהם למגדול ועד קטן. וייטב הדבר בעיני המלך והשרים ויעש המלך כדבר ממוכן. וישלח סברים מכל מדינות המלך אל מדינה ומדינה ככתבה ואל עם ועם כלשונו להיות כל איש שורד בביתו ומדבר כלשון עמו. Chapter 2 אחר הדברים האלה כשוחמת המלך אחשוורוש זכר את ושתי ואת אשר עשת ואת אשר נגזר עליה. ויאמרו נערי המלך משרתיו יבקשו למלך נערות בתולות טובות מראה. ויפקד המלך פקודים בכל מדינות מלכותו ויקבצו את נערה ותולה טובת מראה אל שושן הבירה אל בית הנשים אל יד הגיא. סריס המלך שומר הנשים ונתון תמרוקיהן. והנערה אשר תיטב בעיני המלך תמלוך תחת ושתי וייטב הדבר בעיני המלך ויעש כן. איש יהודי היה בשושן הבירה ושמו מרדכי בן יאיר בן שמעי בן קיש איש ימיני. אשר הוגלה מירושלים עם הוגלה אשר הוגלתה עם יחוניה מלך יהודה אשר הגלה נבוכדנצר מלך בבל. ויהי אומנת הדסה היא אסתר בת דודו כי אין לאו עד אב ואם והנערה יפת תואר וטובת מראה ובמות אביה ואימה לקחה מרדכי לא לבד. ויהי בהישמע דבר המלך ודתו ובהיקבץ נערות רבות אל שושן הבירה אל יד הגיא. ותילקח אסתר אל בית המלך אל יד הגיא שומר הנשים. ותיטב הנערה בעיניו ותישא חסד לפניו ויבהל את תמרוקיה ואת תמרוקיה ואת מנותיה לתת לה ואת של הנערות הראויות לתת לה מבית המלך וישנה ואת נערותיה לטוב בית הנשים. לא הגידה אסתר את עמה ואת מולדתה כי מרדכי ציווה עליה אשר לא תגיד. ובכל יום ויום מרדכי מתהלך לפני חצר בית הנשים לדעת את שלום אסתר ומה יעשה בה. ובהגיעתו נערה ונערה לבוא אל מלך אחשוורוש מקץ היות לה כדת הנשים 12 חודש כי כן ימלאו ימי מרוקיהן 6 חודשים בשמן המאור ו6 חודשים בבשר סמים ובתמרוקי הנשים. ובזה הנערה באה אל המלך עת כל אשר תאמר יינתן לה לבוא עמה מבית הנשים עד בית המלך. בערב הוא באה בבוקר היא שבה אל בית הנשים שני אל יד שער גז. סריס המלך שומר הפילגשים לא תבוא עוד אל המלך כי אם חפץ בה המלך ונקרא בשם. ופגיע תור אסתר בת אביחיל דוד מרדכי אשר וכך לא לבט לבוא אל המלך, לא ביקשה דבר כי אם אשר יאמר, הגה סריס המלך שומר הנשים, ותהי אסתר נושאת חן בעיני כל רואיה. ותילקח אסתר אל המלך אחשוורוש את בית מלכותו, בחודש העשירי הוא חודש טבת, בשנת 7 למלכותו. ויאהב המלך את אסתר מכל הנשים, ותישא חן וחסד לפניו מכל הבתולות, וישם כתר מלכות בראשה, וימלכיה תחת ושתי, ויעש המלך משתה גדול, וכל שריו ועבדיו את משתה אסתר, והנחה למידות עשה, וייתן מצדקת המלך. ובהיקבץ בתולות שנית, ומרדכי יושב בשער המלך. אין אסתר מהגר מולדתה ואת אמר כאשר ציווה עליה מרדכי, ואת מאמר מרדכי אסתר עושה כאשר הייתה באומנה איתו. בימים ההם מרדכי יושב בשער המלך קצר, בקטן ותרש שני סריסי המלך ושומרי הסף, ויבקשו לשלוח יד במלך אחשוורוש, ויוודע הדבר למרדכי, ויגד לאסתר המלכה, ותאמר אסתר למלך בשם מרדכי. ויבוקש הדבר וימצא, ויתעלו שניהם על עץ, וייכתב בספר דברי הימים לפני המלך. All right, those were chapters 1 and 2. My screen froze for a moment. Mara, is the screen sharing off and is my picture back up?
Yes and yes.
Great. All right, so my screen froze for a moment. And I don't quite know how to unfreeze it. So if there are any questions in the chat, normally I would check them out and read them, but I can't seem to see them. Any ones that have come up, and if not, then I have a couple of things from the verses that I can pop up.
Mostly we have people sharing their favorite Hamantashen flavor, which I love. I think we were all enthralled by the different moving pictures and GIFs. So if you would like to share your insights, please do. And for anyone else who is now mulling over what was happening, feel free to use the chat. I think we'll be using the chat mostly in terms of asking questions. So thank you, Meryl.
Outstanding. And if anyone knows anything about MacBook Airs, I'm on a MacBook Air, and the slideshow that I was sharing, I'm on the last slide, I'm hitting escape, and the last picture is up here, the one with LeBron James as king, which is a wonderful gift to keep watching and rewatching, but it's not getting out, and I don't want to log off and log back in. So if anyone has any great techniques from MacBook Air for how to get out of it, that would be great, because otherwise I can't share the next slides. So if anything pops up in the chat,
mostly questions about why there's no mention of God.
That is a fantastic question. So I look at a contrast between the Haggadah, which we read on Passover, and the Megillah, which we're reading here on Purim. And the Haggadah, there's actually no mention of Moses in the traditional Hebrew text. And one of the ideas there is that it was God who performed all the miracles. It was God who redeemed the people. It was God who took note of the Israelites as slaves, and it was God who brought them out of the land of Egypt. In contrast, here, during the Megillah, we see this is a long time later. And just as God, thousands of years ago, was really the salvation of the Israelite people, we as human beings have capacity to be the agents of our own salvation. Now, you'll see in chapter 4, Mordechai makes allusion to God, that help will come from elsewhere, Esther, if you don't intercede. So there's certainly an allusion to God there, but I really look at the story of the Megillah as an empowering message that we as human beings are able to be active agents of our own salvation. Any other questions that have come up?
We are getting some questions and some tech advice. So
Let's hear the tech advice first, because I still have that screen up there.
let's see. If you hit Control Alt Delete, you can close the slideshow task and reopen. Also, we can, if you do want to exit and come back in, I can talk us through how to potentially add fun things onto our screens, like a crown or a silly
Outstanding. I
mask.
think I'm going to exit and come right back in. I will be back in just a moment.
Okay, great. If anyone wants to join me in the silliness of Purim, you can let's see. There's a camera button on your Zoom. If you click the little arrow, you can choose things like choose a virtual background, choose a virtual filter. I hit choose a virtual filter, and now I'm going to put on a beret. And maybe you can see that. Yeah, so I would love to be able to share the Megillah in a French accent maybe next year. But if anyone wants to spend some time, oh, here's Rabbi. So I just changed hats. Thanks all for the patience. Thank you, Evelyn. I appreciate your comment. Oh, and we have some smiley faces. Thank you, Roshona. I hope I'm saying your name correctly, but I love the smileys. Thanks all for embracing the spirit. And now I am looking for Rabbi. Okay, we should be good. Rabbi?
There we go. All right. So I logged in.
Oh no, and now you're frozen. Okay, so I think
Because my MacBook is still frozen. All right. Is this working here?
Mara,
can
yes,
you hear me?
You froze a bit, but you're back.
I can't hear you. Oh, I can't hear you, Mara.
At some point we'll find the lesson in the tech issues. But for now, we can you hear me?
Are you able to hear me, Mara, or not quite? Yes? Okay. I can't hear you, though, but as long as you can hear me, that's fine. So I am on a different computer now. I had all the tabs open and ready to go on the other computer. All right, we're going to jump into chapters 3 and 4. Hopefully, it's going to work a little bit better here. And let's try screen sharing. All right. Here we go with chapters 3 and 4. If you aren't able to hear, will you just let me know? Because I can't hear Mara.
Well, I have my speakers turned off.
Oh, great. No, that's fine. All right. Achar hadivarim ha'ele gidal hamelech Achashverosh et Haman. Ben Hamidata Agagi Vaisanehu Vayasem et Kiso Me'al Kol Asarim Asher Ito V'chol Avdei HaMelech Asher B'shar HaMelech Korim U'Shachavim LeHaman Ki Chen Tziva Lo HaMelech U'Mordechai Lo Yichra V'Lo Yishtachaveh Vayomeru Avdei HaMelech Asher B'shar HaMelech LeMordechai Madua ata over et mitzvat hamelech. Vayehi be'omeram elav yom vayom velo shama alehem ve'gidu lehaman. Lirot hayamdu divrei Mordechai ki higi lahem asher hu Yehudi. Vayar Haman. כי אין מרדכי קורא משחווה לו וימלא המן. חמה ויבז בעיניו לשלוח יד במרדכי לבדו, כי הגידו לו את מרדכי ובקש המן. להשמיד כל היהודים אשר בכל מלכות אחשוורוש עם מרדכי. בחודש הראשון הוא חודש ניסן בשנת 12 למלך אחשוורוש הפיל פור הוא הגורל לפני המן. מיום ליום מחודש לחודש 12 הוא חודש אדר. ויאמר המן למלך אחשוורוש ישנו עם אחד מפוזר ומפורד בין העמים בכל מדינות מלכות כרך ודתיהם שונות מכל עם, ואת דתי המלך אינם מוציאים למלך ולמלך אין שווה להניחם. אם על המלך טוב ייכתב לעובדם ב10,000 כיכר כסף אשכול על ידי עושי המלאכה להביא את כנזי המלך. ויסר המלך את טבתו מעל ידו ויתנה להמן בן המדתה האגגית צורר היהודים. ויאמר המלך להמן הכסף נתון לך והעם לעשות בו כטוב בעיניו. ויקראו סופרי המלך בחודש הראשון ב13 יום בו וייכתב ככל צבא אשר המן את החפרשתני המלך ואת הפחות אשר על מדינה ומדינה ואל שרי עם ועם מדינה ומדינת יכתבה ועם ועם כי יושנו בשם המלך אחשוורוש נכתב ונכתב בטבעת המלך. ונשלוח ספרים ביד הרצים בכל מדינות המלך להשמיד ולהרוג בכל היהודים מנער ועד זקן טף ונשים ביום אחד ב13 לחודש 12 הוא חודש אדר ושללם לבוז. השגן הכתב להינתן דת בכל מדינה ומדינה גלוי לכל העמים להיות עתידים ליום הזה. הרצים יצאו דחופים בדבר המלך והדת ניתנה בשושן הבירה והמלך והמן ישבו לשתות והעיר שושן נבוכה. Here we go with chapter 4. ומרדכי ידע כל אשר נעשה ויקרא מרדכי את בגדיו וילבש שק ואפר ויצא בתוך העיר ויזעק זעקה גדולה ומרה ויבוא עד לפני שער המלך כי אין לבוא אל שער המלך בלבוש שק. ובכל מדינה ומדינה מקום אשר דבר המלך ודתו מגיע אבל גדול ליהודים וצום ובכי ומספד שק ואפר יוצא לרבים. ותבואנה נערות אסתר וסריסיה ויגידו לה ותתחלל המלכה מאוד ותשלח בגדים להלביש מרדכי ולהסיר שקו מעל ולא קיבל. ותקרא אסתר להתך מסריסי המלך אשר העמיד לפניה ותצווהו על מרדכי לדעת מה זה ועל מה זה. ויצא התך אל מרדכי אל רחוב העיר אשר לפני שער המלך ויגד לו מרדכי את כל אשר קראו ואת פרשת הכסף אשר אמר המן לשקול על גזי המלך ביהודים לעבדם ואת פרשת כתב הדת אשר נתן בשושן להשמידם נתן לו להראות את אסתר ולהגיד לה ולצוות עליה לבוא אל המלך להתחנן לו ולבקש מלפניו על עמה. Vayavo hatach v'yagid le'Esther et divrei Mordechai. Vatomer Esther lehata vatetzavehu et Mordechai kol avdei hamelech va'am medinot hamelech yodim asher kol ish ve'isha asher yavo al hamelech el hachatzer hapinimit asher lo yikareh achat tato lehamit levad me'asher yoshit lo hamelech et shavit hazahav ve'chayav ani לא נקראת לבוא אל המלך זה 30 יום. ויגידו למרדכי את דברי אסתר, ויאמר מרדכי להשיב את אסתר, אל תדמי בנפשך להימלט בית המלך מכל היהודים, כי אם אחרי תרחישי בעת הזאת, רווח והצלה יעמוד ליהודים ממקום אחר. ואת בת אביו תאבדו, ומי יודע אם לעת כזאת הגעת למלכות. ותאמר אסתר להשיב אל מרדכי, לך כנוס לכל היהודים הנמצאים בשושן, וצומו עלי ואל תאכלו ואל תשתו 3 ימים לילה ויום, גם אני ונורתי עצום כן, ובכן אבוא אל המלך אשר לא חדלת, וכאשר עבדתי. ויעבור מרדכי ויעש ככל אשר ציוותה עליו אסתר. All right. Are there any questions now? Mara, try talking for a moment, please. I want to see if I can hear you yet.
No one has ever told me they can't hear me. Okay, great.
There we go. Now I can hear you by Zoom too. All right. Were there any questions that came up in the previous 2 chapters that anyone would like to address?
We are, thinking a lot about the violence that is sort of under a lot of the text, even in these first 4 chapters. And a lot of people, I know that most of this happened in the first 2 chapters, actually, but they're sort of like, what happened to Vashti? We talked about how Esther is a hero of the Purim text, certainly, and maybe underappreciated, but did Vashti die? Was she exiled? What happened to her?
So one of my teachers at rabbinical school, Rabbi Dr. Rabbi Harris, would use the following 2-word phrase to describe the Bible, and I've carried it with me all through this time: delightfully ambiguous. So there are times when the Bible is ambiguous. It's not clear. We don't know for sure what happened to Vashti. Was she banished? Was she just deposed as queen? Was she beheaded? And from Rabbi Harris's perspective, the ambiguity is delightful because it gives us so much room and so many opportunities for interpretation. And essentially, the only quote unquote rule for interpreting the Bible is as long as you can defend what you're saying from within the text, then your interpretation is valid and legitimate, which is what really opens up this wonderful corpus of interpretation, which continues to this day. So whether Vashti was banished, whether she was deposed, whether she was beheaded, it's entirely unclear. And I mean this in a good way. Yes, to any of those possibilities. So if one of those possibilities really grabs you, look back at chapter 1 and really start to get this picture of Achashverosh, of this king, of his advisors, of how you think they would handle it. And you're right? Because you're certainly not wrong. So that's part 1 in terms of Vashti and interpretation. And in terms of violence, there are really 2 ways that I can look at the violence here. And certainly when we get to chapters 8 and 9, the violence is going to be rampant, especially when Esther and Mordechai say, hey, now that we've taken 1 day to fight and kill a whole bunch of our enemies, let's do it again for another day. Right? That's essentially what they say. The violence is present and it's rampant. And there are a couple of ways really to look at it. One is to stand up and decry the violence, right? I appreciate the text. I appreciate the learning. I appreciate the messages, and I reject the call to violence. And that's okay, right? What's the cliche? Throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think there's space to take in some of the lessons and reject some of the other patterns and paths. That is one possibility. Another is to almost look and say, look, we're talking about 2,000 years ago, where this kind of response by violence is normalized in society. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's wrong. But what we're not doing is extrapolating from 2,000 years ago and saying this is how we should behave today. Rather, we're honoring that this is part of a history from thousands of years ago. And thousands of years ago, this was not an inappropriate response in context. So I'm able to accept that 2,000 years ago, this is what the response was, while suggesting that today, this is not how I would respond. So one is really looking at the story in context. And a third possibility is that the stories from the Bible are allegories far more than they are history, right? That I'm looking at this not as historical events, not as Haman and Achashverosh and Bigtan and Teresh and Mordechai and Esther and Vashti. This is not a historical record of these people who lived and of events that happened. Rather, this is an allegory. The whole point is to teach us lessons. And perhaps one of the lessons is to see the dangers of violence. Right? So if we look at this as allegory rather than as history, then perhaps we're a little less troubled by the violence, and rather we can look at the violence as a lesson from which we can and must learn. So those would be my responses to that.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more question, or do you want to get back to reading?
Absolutely. Go for it.
So you were talking about how themes of 2,000 years ago, putting today's modern perspective on it, it can be a little bit complicated. But I think something that has been showing up in the chat is these questions of identity, both 2,000 years ago and today, are, they're on a lot of our minds. So Esther, when she was, becomes queen, goes into the palace, what did her Jewish practice look like? Obviously, she's keeping her identity a secret, but do we have a sense of Shabbat? Did she keep kosher? What did that look like for her?
So, pretty obviously, we're going to go back to the first thing that I said, which is yes. Remember, so if we look at the idea of the Bible as delightfully ambiguous, then yes, Mara, maybe she was Shomeret Shabbat and kept every single Jewish law in private. Maybe she really rejected ritual Jewish practice and even kind of denied her own identity, and either could be defended by the text. When Esther in chapter 4 really steps into her call as queen and that she needs to intercede, she calls for a fast, that the Jewish people should fast. That is a traditional, classical Jewish response. So if you want to argue that in secret, Esther was practicing Jewish rituals, you can say, look, the first thing she does is call for a fast. That is a traditional response. So my response is yes, that is absolutely defensible. You could also say, look, Mordechai says to Esther, keep your identity hidden. She says, okay. It might be incredibly hard to do that if you live every single moment of every single day through Jewish identity and practice. Perhaps it was very easy for her as an assimilated Jew in Shushan to keep her identity hidden. And she might have been a Jew in terms of name and might have felt a connection with it, but it's very easy to suggest that her Jewish identity and practice were not a particularly central part of her life. And it's only when literally her life and the lives of every single Jew were threatened, that she called forth her identity and her practice in a much more purposeful way. So those are two almost extreme responses. And I think either one is defensible by the text, and certainly anything in between would be defensible as well.
Amazing. I think we're gonna keep going.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Great. And I was just going to make one more, and I don't mean to make this comment as an offhand comment, and I should have said something at the very beginning, which is certainly talking about violence and identity. Those are two conversations which are very present for us as Jews, as Jewish adjacent people, as Jewish curious people, as people who feel a connection with Israel, with Palestinians, with the Middle East, connection, confusion. There is so much going on in terms of violence and identity that these questions are uniquely present right now. And one of the questions that has come up, and I should have said this at the very beginning, I apologize, is what's the role of celebration and joy amid times of violence, conflict, and confusion? Because for many of us, our Jewish identities, we feel a lot of confusion around them right now. I would say Judaism, from its inception, always says there are times of joy. And during times of joy, you celebrate. It doesn't mean we ignore the troubling things going on in our world and in the universe. It doesn't mean we put them aside. It means that in some ways, especially when things are difficult, if we have that opportunity to find a pocket of time to celebrate, we celebrate. And so we are taking this opportunity and privilege. And I know that we're an international group of people who are here. I think there's someone from the Czech Republic, right? If we have the opportunity to celebrate, we celebrate. And it doesn't mean we're ignoring. It doesn't mean we're dismissing. It means we recognize that, look, part of being a Jew, being a part of human being means to grieve and to mourn and to be in conflict. And part of it means to celebrate and enjoy. So we're taking this opportunity to be joyous together. So I should have mentioned that at the beginning. All right, let's continue with chapters 5 and 6 of the Megillah. Here we go. And these are the chapters, by the way, where Esther really, chapter 5 in particular, where she really begins to employ her brilliant stratagem. Whoops. Slideshow. There we go. All right. Vayehi bayom hashlishi vatilbash Esther machut v'ta'amod b'chatzar beit hamelech hapnimit nochach beit hamelech v'hamelech yoshev al kiso machutol v'etel machut nochach petach habayit vayehi chirot hamelech et Esther malka omedet bechatzer nase achen be'enav vayoshet hamelech le'Esther et sharvit hazahav asher biyado vatikra v'Esther vatiga b'rosh hasharvit vayomer la hamelech malach Esther hamalka uma b'kashatech ad chetzi hamachut vayinaten lach vatomer Esther ima lamelech tov yavo hamelech v'haman hayom el hamishte asher asiti lo vayomer hamelech maharu et Haman La'asot et devar Esther vayavo hamelech v'Haman el hamishte asher asata Esther vayomer hamelech le'Esther b'mishteh hayayin masher letech vayinaten lech uma b'kashatech ad chatzi hamachut v'te'as vata'an Esther vatomar she'elati uvakashati imatzati chen be'enei hamelech v'mal hamelech tov lateh et she'elati ולעשות את בקשתי יבוא המלך והמן. אל המשתה אשר אעשה להם ומחר אעשה כדבר המלך ויצא המן. ביום ההוא שמח וטוב לב בחירות המן. את מרדכי בשער המלך ולא קם ולא זע ממנו וימלא המן על מרדכי חמאה ויתאפק המן Vayavo el beito vaishlach v'yavetu avav yetzer shishto. Sorry, once fly too many. There we go. Vayisaper lahem Haman et kivodo shro v'rovanav et kol asher gidelo hamelech v'et asher niseo al asarim ve'avnei hamelech vayomer Haman אף לא הביאה אסתר המלכה עם המלך, אלא משטר אשר עשתה כי עם אותי, וגם למחר אני קרולה עם המלך, וכל זה איננו שווה לי בכל עת. אשר אני רואה את מרדכי היהודי יושב בשער המלך, ותאמר לו, זרש אשתו וכל אוהביו, יעשו עץ גבוה 50 אמה, ובבוקר אמור למלך, ויתלו את מרדכי עליו ובואו עם המלך, אל משתה שמח, וייטב הדבר לפני המן, ויעש העץ. Chapter 6. בלילה ההוא נדדה שנת המלך ויאמר להביא את ספר זיכרונות דברי הימים, והיו נקראים לפני המלך, וימצא כתוב אשר הגיד מרדכי על בגתן ותרש, שני סריסי המלך משומרי הסף אשר ביקשו לשלוח יד למלך אחשוורוש. ויאמר המלך מה נעשה יקר וגדולה למרדכי על זה, ויאמרו נערי המלך ושריו לא נעשה עמו דבר. ויאמר המלך מי בחצר המן בא לחצר בית המלך החיצונה לאמור למלך לתלות את מרדכי על העץ אשר הכין לו. ויאמרו נערי המלך אליו הנה המן עומד בחצר. ויאמר המלך יבוא, ויבוא המן. ויאמר לו המלך מה לעשות באיש אשר המלך חפץ ביקרו. ויאמר המן בליבו למי יחפוץ המלך לעשות יקר יותר ממני. ויאמר המן אל המלך איש אשר המלך חפץ ביקרו יביאו לבוש מלכות אשר לבש בו המלך וסוס אשר רכב עליו המלך ואשר ניתן כתר מלכות בראשו, ונתון הלבוש והסוס על יד איש משרי המלך הפרטמים, והלבישו את האיש אשר המלך חפץ ביקרו, והרכיבו הסוס ברחוב העיר וקראו לפניו, ככה יעשה לאיש אשר המלך חפץ ביקרו. ויאמר המלך להמן מהר קח את הלבוש ואת הסוס כאשר דיברת, ועשה כן למרדכי היהודי היושב בשער המלך, אל תפל דבר מכל אשר דיברת. ויקח המן את הלבוש ואת הסוס, וילבש את מרדכי וירכיבו ברחוב העיר, ויקרא לפניו, ככה יעשה לאיש אשר המלך חפץ ביקרו. וישוב מרדכי על שער המלך, והמן נדחף אל ביתו אבל וחפוי ראש. ויספר המן לזרש אשתו ולכל אוהביו את כל אשר קראו. ויאמרו לא חכמה וזרש אשתו היא מזרע היהודים, מרדכי אשר החילות לנפול לפניו לא תוכלו, כי נפול תיפול לפניו. עודם מדברים עמו וסריסי המלך הגיעו, ויפעילו להביא את המן אל המשתה אשר עשתה אסתר. All right, those were chapters 5 and chapter 6. Mara, were there any questions that came up during those chapters.
I was muted.
Oops, there we go.
Not regarding these two chapters. So if anyone wants to quickly add a comment or a question regarding what happened in these last two, I could say, episodes, feel free to do that now. Oh, this is a good question. Miriam asks, why does Esther host two feasts instead of just one?
Excellent. This is part of the genius and brilliance of Esther's ploy. At some point, I can talk more a lot more about this, but Esther is so politically astute and savvy, and does a brilliant job reading people. Achashverosh tends to be indecisive, easy to anger, very quick to listen to others, is impulsive. So here, Esther is starting to build up this kind of insecurity within Achashverosh, because someone who is indecisive, easy to anger, impulsive, there's a latent insecurity in and around that when they tend to always listen to other people. And so at the first time that she gathers Achashverosh, she says, great, thanks for coming. I'm going to tell you what I need next time. Come again. And if you're insecure, that's going to make you wonder. And not only that, who does she invite both times? Haman. So now you're the king. And at first you think you're being invited to something with the queen, and now Haman is there. Why is Haman there? And now they go to another banquet. Now Haman is here again. And what on earth is going on? What's going on between Esther and Haman? Is there an affair going on? Why does he keep coming? Is she trying to depose me? Does she want to get away from me? What on earth is going on? So if you are a hot-headed, insecure, indecisive king, think of what he must be thinking and feeling and seething internally about, with Esther continually inviting him and him again and Haman to these feasts after feast. And we're going to see exactly in chapter 7, when the big reveal happens, that Achashverosh's response first is fury, and I have to imagine embedded within that is some relief. Right? So you're going to see that this isn't about Esther Esther still loves the king and she beseeches the king and all these wonderful things. This has nothing to do with the king. This has entirely to do with Haman. And now he can place and displace all of these emotions onto Haman. So what a brilliant, not only political read, but also read of character. And she also is feeding into Haman's ego, right? Haman is strutting around. I got invited to a banquet with the queen. I got invited to another banquet with the queen. And he is going to be Haman, going to be completely blindsided by this big Esther reveal, right? Yes, maybe that's why he couldn't sleep that first night. Thank you. I don't know if that was Marcia or Tom or both of you who wrote that in. I never thought of it that way, but that's brilliant, because the first banquet was chapter 1. Then you have chapter 5, and then chapter 6. He has all this sleep unrest. So maybe that's part of what led to his unrest. Thank you very, very much. Other questions or comments that have jumped up?
I'm just appreciating Irene, who is sharing that this sort of reads like a comedy, like a musical or an opera, telenovela, and I just wanted to bring that to into the conversation.
Oh, absolutely. This would be a great Shakespearean play, wouldn't it? Right? And one of the major themes of the Megillah is opposites, right? That Haman, by his wife's instruction, created gallows to hang Mordecai. Plot reveal for anyone who hasn't read the story yet. Haman is going to end up hanged on those gallows. So you're going to see time and time and time again a complete reversal of fortune. Look at chapter 6. Haman, in his arrogance, thought that the king wanted to honor him. So Haman listed all these things that you're supposed to do to honor and parade a hero. And then, of course, Haman ends up leading Mordecai on the horse around town, right? So this is full of opposites, which, by the way, in some ways is one of the reasons we wear a costume. That's one of the reasons, right? We get to mask ourselves. We get to be someone completely different and put on, in some ways, an opposite persona. This, of course, is my natural hair, so I wear a wig every other day of the year. So that's my flip side for opposites. But right, we get to do. We get to really embrace opposites. And something I wrote before, I just popped into the chat my email address, and I'll remind again at the end. If you'd like, feel free to email me something. If we didn't get to something here in the chat and or other questions come up, feel free to email me. I will reply. It might not be right away, especially this upcoming week when I'm traveling. I'm the keynote at a conference, so I would ask just a little bit of graciousness if I don't get back to you so quickly. But if you do have other questions, please feel free to pop any comments or send me any emails. I just saw a quick note about my rooster headpiece, and I hadn't thought of it about as a rooster headpiece. I actually have backyard chickens, so maybe I am dressed up as one of my birds in the backyard. So, all right, should we hop to chapter 7 and 8?
Let's do it.
Here we go. All right, chapters 7 and 8. Vayavo hamelech vehaman lishtot im Esther hamaka vayomer hamelech leEsther gam bayom hasheni b'mishteh hayayin ma she'alatech Esther hamaka vatinaten lach uma bakashatech et chatzi hamachut v'te'as vatan Esther hamaka vatomar אם מצאתי חן בעיניך המלך, ואם על המלך טוב, תינתן לי נפשי בשאלתי ועמי בבקשתי. כי נמכרנו אני ועמי להשמיד, להרוג ולאבד, ואילו לעבדים ולשפחות נמכרנו החרשתי, כי אין הצער שווה בנזק המלך. ויאמר המלך אחשוורוש ויאמר לאסתר מלכה, מיהו זה ואיזה הוא? אשר מלאו ליבו לעשות כן, ותאמר אסתר איש צר ואויב, המן הרע הזה, והמן נבעט מלפני המלך והמלכה, והמלך קם בחמתו ממשתה היין אל גינת הביתן, והמן, whoops, I think there we go. עמד לבקש על נפשו מאסתר המלכה, כי ראה כי חלתו אליו הרעה מאת המלך, והמלך שב מגינת הביתן אל בית משתה היין, והמן נופל על מיטה אשר אסתר עליה, ויאמר המלך גם לכבוש את המלכה, אמי בבית, הדבר יצא מפי המלך ופני המן חפו. ויאמר חרבונה אחד מן הסריסים לפני המלך, גם הנה העץ אשר עשה המן למרדכי אשר דיבר טוב על המלך, עומד בבית המן. כעבור 50 ימים ויאמר המלך תלוהו עליו, ויתלו את המן על העץ אשר הכין למרדכי, וחמת המלך שככה. Chapter 8. ביום ההוא נתן המלך אחשוורוש לאסתר המלכה אל בית המן צורר היהודים, ומרדכי בא לפני המלך כי הגידה אסתר מהולה. ויסר המלך את טבעתו אשר העביר מהמן, ויתנה למרדכי, ותשם אסתר את מרדכי על בית המן. ותוסף אסתר ותדבר לפני המלך המלך ותיפול לפני רגליו ותתחתן לו להעביר את רעת המן האגגי ואת מחשבתו אשר חשב על היהודים. Whoops. I was a little late with that verse. There we go. ויושת המלך לאסתר את שביט הזהב ותקום אסתר ותעמוד לפני המלך ותאמר אמא למלך טוב ימצאתי חן לפניו וכשר הדבר לפני המלך וטובה אני בעיניו ייכתב לשבט הספרים מחשבת המן. בן המדדת האגגי אשר כתב לאבד את היהודים אשר בכל מדינות המלך כי איכך אוכל וראיתי ברעה אשר ימצאי עמי ואיכך אוכל וראיתי באובדן מולדתי. ויאמר המלך אחשוורוש לאסתר המלכה ולמרדכי היהודי הנה בית המן נתתי לאסתר ואותו תלו על העץ על אשר שלח ידו ביהודים ואתם כתבו על היהודים כתוב ביניכם בשם המלך וחיתמו בטבעת המלך כי כתב אשר נכתב בשם המלך ונחתום בטבעת המלך אין להשיב ויקראו סופרי המלך בית ההיא בחודש השלישי הוא חודש סיוון ב30 יום בו ויקטב בכל אשר ציווה מרדכי את היהודים ולך הפרשני והפחות ושרי המדינות אשר בהודו ויד כוש 27 ומאה מדינה ככתבה בעם כלשונו ואל היהודים ככתבם וכלשונם ויכתוב בשם המלך אחשוורוש ויכתוב בטבעת המלך וישלח ספרים ביד הרצים בסוסים רוכבי הרכש והחשטרנים בני הרמחים אשר נתן המלך ליהודים אשר בכל עיר להיקהל ולעמוד על נפשם להשמיד ולהרוג ולאבד את כל עם ומדינה הצרים אותם טף ונשים ושלם לבוז ביום אחד בכל מדינות המלך אחשוורוש ב13 לחודש 12 וחודש אדר פת שגן הכתב להינתן דת בכל מדינה בגלל גלוי לכל העמים להיות היהודים עתידים ליום הזה להינקם מאויביהם הרצים רוכבי הרכש החשטנים יצאו מבוהלים ודחופים בדבר המלך והדת נשען בשושן הבירה ומרדכי יצא לפני המלך לבוש מרדכי תכלת וחור ועטרת זהב גדולה ותחריץ בוץ וארגמן והעיר שושן צהולה ושמחה ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון ויקר ובכל מדינה ומדינה ובכל עיר ועיר מקום אשר דבר המלך ודתו מגיע שמחה וששון ליהודים משתה ויום טוב ורבים מעמי הארץ מתייהדים כי נפל פחד היהודים עליהם. All right, those were chapters 7 and 8. Mara, were there any questions that came up during the reading of those chapters?
Yeah, we have a lot of people who are sort of interested in the character development of of course, Esther, but people are asking about the king, and the role he plays. Is he a hero? Is he a villain? It doesn't seem like, at least at this point, he's taken any responsibility for really much of anything. So can you speak to his character and what his role in the plot is?
Absolutely. And once again, if you want to go through the text and try to frame King Ahasuerus as a villain, I think you'll have plenty of evidence to do that. If you want to go through the text and try to frame the king in a heroic lens, you have plenty of evidence to do that. If you want to go through the text and try to frame the king as I was doing earlier as someone indecisive and slow to and easy to anger and impulsive. You have plenty of evidence to do that. And if you want to frame the king as someone who grows through this this whole narrative, you have plenty of evidence to do that as well. So there really are a lot of possibilities. I think there are a couple of things that really jump out at me. He seems to love Esther, and whether that love is born out of lust, whether that is born out of affection, whether that is born out of admiration of her courage, perhaps a courage that he himself doesn't have and sees in her instead, there seems to be something very positive about the way that the king feels about Esther. And again, whether this is that definition of true love, whether this is the definition of true lust, again, I think you can go back and forth. I'm on the side that I think he really loves Esther. And whether he grows to do that, whether it's that love at first sight, whether he sees in Esther the characteristics that he lacks, I think he loves her. And if nothing else, he feels protective of her, which is certainly not how he felt about Vashti. And I don't think this is radical growth on the king's part. I think he feels something deep toward Esther. So that's one thing that I think carries through. I tend to fall on the side of an indecisive and somewhat impulsive king, because as we've begun to see, and as we're going to see later on, all of a sudden Mordecai is going to have this rapid ascent, right? So first in chapters 1 and 2, the king was listening to all of his advisors. By chapter 3, Haman had become second in command. Now we're going to see Mordecai become second in command. And we can sit here and we can make the argument, finally the king is making good choices. He finally recognized that Mordecai is a valid advisor. That being said, for Mordecai to jump all the way to second in command just with the snap of fingers, to me, highlights some of that impulsivity, that the king is not someone who really wants to be making those big decisions, and he keeps trying to find someone who he thinks is going to be a good advisor. So I come on the side where I'm not so impressed by the king. And in terms of lack of accountability, this gets highlighted where Esther and Mordecai, I think it was in chapter 8, asked the king to repeal Haman's decree to kill the Jews. And the king says, I can't do it. Right? A decree is a decree is a decree is a decree. And I can't repeal it, because if I repeal that decree, that means the decree was wrong. And by extension, I was wrong. King can't do that. So rather than repealing the decree, Achashverosh essentially orders a parallel decree permitting the Jews to defend themselves and prohibiting anyone from stopping the Jews from defending themselves. So rather than revoking the decree of attacking the Jews, he comes up with a different decree to let the Jews defend themselves, which, by the way, if we step back, all the king is doing is saying, well, the response to the violence that I'm permitting is allowing more violence. So all in all, I am not particularly impressed with the king. That is my response. And again, you can really make a lot of compelling different arguments about a king who grows throughout the Megillah, and or someone who perhaps there really is political savvy behind some of the things that he does. Were there other comments that jumped up, Mara, that I missed during that?
Lots of questions about our characters, but I think we're good to move forward.
Okay, we'll move forward. Once again, I'm going to pop my email in here. Do feel free to, whoops, that was the wrong email. Once again, feel free to send me an email and I will get back to you as soon as I can. It might be a little bit, but do feel free to send me an email. And we will now go to our final 2 chapters of the Megillah. Chapter 9 is the longest for those counting at home. And for those counting at home, chapter 10 is the shortest, only 3 verses. All right, chapters 9 and 10. Uvishneim Asar chodesh hu chodesh adar b'shashasar yom bo asher higia dvar hamelech v'dato lehasot bayom asher siberu oyevei hayudim l'shot bahem v'nehafochu asher yishletu hayudim hema b'sonehem. And by the way, just connecting a question earlier, we talked about opposites coming up. Here, that word opposite literally appears in the text. ניקלו היהודים בעריהם בכל מדינות המלך אחשוורוש לשלוח יד במבקשי רעתם, ואיש לא עמד בפניהם כי נפל פחדם על כל היהודים וכל שרי המדינות והחשפנים והפחות ועושי המלאכה אשר למלך מנשאים את היהודים כי נפל פחד מרדכי עליהם, כי גדול מרדכי בבית המלך ושם הולך בכל המדינות, כי האיש מרדכי הולך וגדול. ויכו היהודים בכל אויביהם מכת חרב והרג באבדן, ויעשו בשונאיהם כרצונם, ובשושן הבירה הרגו היהודים ואבד 500 איש. ואת פרשתנה ואת אלפות ואת ואספת ואת פורת ואת הדלת ואת הדרידת ואת פרשמה ואת הריסה ואת הרידי ואת וסתה עשרת בני המן. בן המדת הצורר היהודים הרגו ובה וזה לא שלחו את ידם. ביום ההוא במספר הרוגים בשושן הבירה לפני המלך, ויאמר המלך לאסתר מלכה בשושן הבירה הרגו היהודים ואבד 500 איש ואת 10 בני המן. בשאר מדינות המלך מעשו, ומשלתך ויינתן לך ומבקשתך עוד ותעש. ותאמר אסתר למלך טוב יינתן גם מחר ליהודים אשר בשושן לעשות כדת היום ואת 10 בני המן. יתלו על העץ ויאמר המלך לעשות כן, ותינתן דת בשושן ואת 10 בני המן. תעלו ויקלו היהודים אשר בשושן גם ביום 14 לחודש אדר, ויהרגו בשושן 300 איש, ובאבי זה לא שלחו את ידם, ושאר יהודים אשר במדינות המלך נקלו ועמד על נפשם ונוח מאויביהם והרוג בשונאיהם 75,000, ובאבי זה לא שלחו את ידם. ביום 13 לחודש אדר בנוח ב14 בו ועשה אותו יום משתה ושמחה, והיהודים אשר בשושן נקלו ב13 בו ו14 בו, ונוח ב15 בו ועשה אותו יום משתה ושמחה. על כן היהודים והפרוזים היושבים בערי הפרזות עושים את יום 14 לחודש אדר שמחה ומשתה ויום טוב, ומשלוח מנות איש לרעהו. ויכתוב מרדכי את הדברים האלה וישלח ספרים לכל יהודים אשר בכל מדינות המלך אחשוורוש הקרובים והרחוקים לקיים עליהם להיות עושים את יום 14 לחודש אדר ואת יום 15 בו בכל שנה ושנה. כימים אשר נחו בהם היהודים מאוהביהם בחודש אשר נהפך ליום יגון לשמחה ומעבר ליום טוב לעשות אותם ימי משתה ושמחה ומשלוח מנות איש רעהו ומתנות לאביונים. וקיבל היהודים את אשר החלו לעשות ואת אשר כתב מרדכי עליהם, כי המן בן המדתה האגגית צורר היהודים חשב על יהודים לעבדם, והפיל פור הוא הגורל להומם לעול עבדם. ובבואה לפני המלך אמר אל הספר ישוב מחשבתו הרעה שחשב ילודים על ראשו, ותלו אותו ואת פניו על העץ. על כן קראו לימים האלה פורים את שם הפור. על כן על כל דברי האיגרת הזאת ומה ראו ככה ומה הגיע עליהם, קיימו וקיבלו היהודים עליהם ve'al zar'am ve'al kol hanilim alehem ve'lo yavor liyot osim et shnei hayamim ha'ele kichtavam v'chizmanam v'chol shana v'chol shana והימים האלה נזכרים ונעשים בכל דבר דור, משפחה, משפחה, מדינה ומדינה. ועיר ועיר וימי הפורים האלה לא יברו מתוך היהודים, ויזכרם ולא יאסוף מזרעם. ותכתוב אסתר המלכה בת אביחיל למרדכי היהודי, כל תכף לקיים את איגרת הפורים הזאת השנית, וישלח ספרים את כל היהודים. עכשיו הבאתם מימי המדינה מלכות אחשוורוש דברי שלום ואמת לקיים את כל ימי הפורים האלה בזמניהם כאשר קיים עליהם מרדכי יהודי ואסתר המלכה וכאשר קיימו נפשה בעזרת דברי עצמות וזעקתם ומאמר אסתר קיים דברי הפורים האלה ונכתב בספר. Chapter 10 וישם המלך אחשוורוש מס על הארץ ויהיה ים וכל מעשה תוקפו וגבורתו ופרשת גדולת מרדכי אשר גידלו המלך הלא הם כתובים על ספר דברי הימים למלכי מדי ופרס. כי מרדכי היהודי משנה למלך אחשוורוש וגדול ליהודים ורצוי לרוב אחד דורש טוב לעמו ודובר שלום לכל זרעו. All right, that was the end of the Megillah reading. We are now going to take a moment to recite the blessings after the Megillah reading. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam harav et rivenu ve'hadan et dinenu ve'nokem et nikmatenu ve'hamishalem gemul l'chol oivei nafshenu ve'hanifra l'chol mitzarenu. Baruch atah Adonai hanifra l'amo Yisrael mikol tzareihem ha'el ha'moshiach. And let's sing one final song together. Let's go with song number 2. Ani Purim sameach umvadeach halo rak pa'am bashana avo lehitareach la 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 la. Once more. Ani Purim sameach umvadeach halo rak pa'am bashana avo lehitareach la 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 la. All right, everyone. Mara, were there any big outstanding questions? Anything else I can address here?
So you wrote on one of the slides that you read all of Haman's son's names in one breath, and there were also certain stylistic things that happened all throughout the Megillah. Can you talk a little bit about why we might say all 10 names in one breath, and if there's any sort of other hidden trope or clue in the text that you want to bring light to?
Sure. So, for anyone who's a sports fan, sometimes you get a fan who runs across the field, oftentimes naked, right? And what news outlets have stopped doing is showing that when it happens, because they think it's going to encourage other people to do it. So you cut away from that because you don't want to give any real press to that kind of behavior. With a similar idea, we try to read all of Haman's sons' names in one breath because we don't want to really give them any due press. According to the rabbis, Haman's sons really were part of the plot that Haman enacted. They were helping Haman make all of the horrors happen against the Jews. So they are also deserving of the same fate as their father. And we don't want to give them any more press than they deserve. So we read all the names in one breath so that we don't have to give them any more attention than we need to give them. So that's the reason for reading them in one breath. And in terms of style, there are many different tropes. There are many different melodies for reading different texts. You have Torah reading melody. You have Haftarah, which is the prophets. You have a separate melody for high holidays, a separate melody for lamentations, for Eicha, and a separate melody for Megillah. So because it's a special scroll and we read it on a special holiday, we create its own special trope for it. There are a couple of times during the reading when you actually do use the Eicha melody. I didn't really overemphasize and highlight it. I just kind of gave hints at it during it for anyone who picked up. Sometimes I would shift into a more minor key for a couple of the words. But yeah, there are a couple of times during the reading when you actually use an Eicha melody for lamentations, for tragedy, because you're talking about a tragic moment in the text. So you would shift to Eicha melody, but the Megillah itself has its own Megillah reading. Megillah trope, excuse me.
Amazing. Okay, so I see people are starting to trickle out, maybe to go to a Purim event, maybe to go and make themselves a Purim treat. So before you all leave, and before I turn it back over to Rabbi Moishe to give us a closing message, I want to share, and I put it in the chat and I'll add it again, that Rabbi Moishe will be leading a second night Seder for all of us. And you can see details. We'll include it in the follow-up as well. But that is now in the chat. And we would really love to see you there. We've loved learning with all of you. And I think we don't always think about the connections between Purim and Passover, but of course they're there. And maybe we can draw some similarities to that during our Seder. So just a reminder, we will share this recording with all of you, including other follow-up messages or follow-up sources. And I invite you, Rabbi, to leave us with a closing thought. What would you like us to be thinking about for the rest of Purim?
I just hope everyone finds a little bit of joy in this Purim day. Certainly, we're amid difficult times, and I hope everyone finds a reason to have a little joy and take a couple of moments, if you can, to share some joy with others as well. So I thank you, Mara, and I thank my Jewish Learning, and I thank everyone who came and participated for all of the joy that you brought here. Once again, please do feel free to reach out and say hello to me and or ask questions. My email is about to go in the chat. I'd love to join you on My Jewish Learning for the second Seder. And for anyone who's in New York for the first Seder, if you would like, I host a community Seder there as well. So thank you all so much again for coming. And a huge thank you to myjewishlearning.com for hosting this, and Tamara for so much incredible time, effort, and work that you put behind the scenes to make this happen.
Thank you all. Purim Sameach. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.